Good evening. Thank you for coming to the press conference. Today, are you ready? Thank you for coming to the press conference. Today, we are providing simultaneous interpretation in Cantonese, Putonghua, and English. First of all, the acting chief executive will address you.
Conference, we are providing simultaneous interpretation in English, Cantonese, and Putonghua. First of all, the acting chief executive will deliver some remarks. 請署理行政長官。
The acting chief executive, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, the day before yesterday, on March 10, announced his decision to resign. Earlier today, the State Council approved his request and announced his decision accordingly. With immediate effect, Mr. Tong has resigned from office. I have been working with Mr. Tong for 7 years. Other principal officials, too, have worked with him for some time. Over these years, we know very well that Mr. Tong has always wholeheartedly and with great passion undertaken his job as the leader of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Government. He has always been mindful of the well-being of the community, particularly the less fortunate. He visited families of different backgrounds, listened to the concerns of single parents and elderly people living alone, and endeavored to understand the aspirations of the disadvantaged youngsters studying hard for their future. Mr. Tong always put the interests of Hong Kong people at the forefront of his administration. Taking care of those in need and providing them with the necessary aid has always been one of his major policy objectives. Since reunification, Hong Kong has triumphed over one challenge after another. The diligence, perseverance, and resourcefulness of our people have certainly played a part. But equally important was the contribution of Mr. Tong. He ensured Hong Kong's stability during the transitional period, successfully implemented the unprecedented and the untested one country, two systems model, led Hong Kong to overcome the Asian financial crisis, and promoted economic integration between the mainland and Hong Kong, which helped hasten Hong Kong's economic restructuring. His contributions to Hong Kong deserve our recognition and thanks. Today, most people will agree that Hong Kong has regained its momentum to move forward. Mr. Tong chose to stay with us and dutifully serve Hong Kong during the most difficult times. He decided to resign only when Hong Kong's development was back on track and society was stable. This noble act is testament to his loyalty to our country and Hong Kong. I am grateful to him for his selfless leadership over the past 7 years, his unswerving efforts for the good of Hong Kong, and even more grateful for the support and trust he showed to me and other colleagues. I believe that although Mr. Tong is physically tired, he should be delighted to see that we have survived the most difficult times and that our economy has started to recover. I wish him all the best and look forward to seeing him contribute to our country and Hong Kong in other capacities. I would like to turn now to the arrangements following Mr. Tong's resignation. Under Article 53 of the Basic Law, as the Chief Secretary for Administration, I will temporarily assume the duties of the Chief Executive. I have invited all members of the Executive Council to stay in office until the new Chief Executive is elected and appointed. They have all agreed. All principal officials will continue to carry out their duties. As you all know, the operation of the government is built upon comprehensive laws and a sound civil service system. I can assure you that the government will continue to operate smoothly and normally. We will ensure effective governance and the continuity of policies, law and order, the smooth operation of the market, and the protection of investor interests. Our most important task now is to make arrangements for the election of a new chief executive. The chief executive election ordinance clearly spells out the timing of the election. In short, according to Section 10(2), if the 120th day after the date on which the office of the chief executive becomes vacant falls on a Sunday, that will be the date of the poll. If it is not a Sunday, then we must conduct the poll on the Sunday immediately after. There is no scope to do it sooner or later. Under the present circumstances, as the office of the chief executive became vacant today, March the 12th, we shall conduct the election on July 10th, as required by law. The chief executive returned this time will serve a term of 2 years to complete Mr. Tong's term of office. Regarding this issue, we understand that there are different views in the community. The Secretary for Justice has looked into the matter and exchanged views with mainland experts, and has researched the drafting history of the Basic Law. The Secretary for Justice has advised that under Article 53 of the Basic Law, the term of office of the new Chief Executive should be the remainder of the original Chief Executive term. The Executive Council accepts that advice. I shall ask the Secretary for Justice to explain the detailed arguments later. In 2007, we will elect the third-term Chief Executive in accordance with the original timetable. The detailed election methods will be based upon results of our current review of the constitutional development. In other words, the review of the methods to elect the Chief Executive in 2007 and to form the Legislative Council in 2008 will go on. It remains our aim that the third-term Chief Executive in 2007 will be elected by an election committee that is more representative and has a broadened electorate base. Under the Basic Law, any amendments to the methods of electing the Chief Executive and of forming the Legislative Council will need the consent of the Chief Executive. Therefore, we will consult the newly elected Chief Executive before publishing the 5th report of the Constitutional Development Task Force. If everything goes well, the new Chief Executive will assume office in July. Between now and then, we still have some time. We will extend the period of the consultation concerning the 4th report until the end of May. This will allow more time for the community to reach a consensus. We will endeavor to publish the 5th report in the latter half of this year and complete all the necessary legislative work before the election of the third-term Chief Executive in 2007. You can see that transitional measures are already in place. The government will endeavor to maintain the stability of Hong Kong on all fronts, especially social and economic. This is our responsibility. But we cannot do the job alone. Without the support of the Legislative Council and the community, we will not succeed. Therefore, we will try our best to explain the relevant arrangements to the Legislative Council as well as the general public as soon as practicable. I thank the LegCo House Committee for inviting me to the special meeting next Tuesday, which I will attend. Finally, I hope that all of us will remain positive when facing these changes, cherish the upturn in our economy, and unite to ensure the continued development of Hong Kong. Thank you. I'll be answering your questions later on.
Thank you, Mr. Zhang. We'll now move on to part 2 of the press conference very soon, so please bear with us for a moment. Before the acting chief executive, the secretary for justice, and the secretary for constitutional affairs floor, I would like to first of all invite Ms. Eslie LEUNG and Mr. Stephen Lam to say a few words to you. Good evening. In the last 10 days or so, there have been discussions that should the incumbent chief executive resign, then should the term of office for a new chief executive be 5 years, or should it expire on the 30th of June 2007? There have been a lot of debate on this. So I would like to state the stance of the government of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region on this issue. When the Hong Kong SALG introduced the chief executive election bill in 2001, we held the view that if a new CE was elected to fill a vacancy arising prematurely, his term of office should run afresh for a period of 5 years. This was based on Article 46 of the Basic Law, which provides that, and I quote, "The term of office of the chief executive of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region shall be 5 years," end of quote. At that time, the Hong Kong SALG applied the common law rules of statutory interpretation and considered that generally clear and unambiguous provisions should be interpreted according to their literal meaning. For a considerable period of time after the chief executive election bill was passed by the Legislative Council and enacted as the chief executive election ordinance, the Hong Kong SALG had been holding the same view. The Hong Kong SALG also stated the stance in writing in response to a question raised by the Legislative Council in May 2004. Section 3 of the ordinance provides that the term of office of the CE shall be 5 years. It does not stipulate whether the term of a CE who assumes office because his predecessor vacates office before the expiration of his term is still 5 years. Recently, many legal professionals in the mainland have expressed the opinion that a CE who assumes office in such circumstances only serves for the residue of the predecessor's term. However, many local lawyers disagree. In view of the difference in opinion on the directions of the former chief executive, I have on recent occasions exchanged views with legal experts in the mainland. I have been supplied with some relevant materials. On this issue, I have also consulted a former basic law drafter, Professor Xu Chongde, and a renowned expert in constitutional law in the mainland, Professor Len Xisheng, both of whom participated in the drafting of the basic law. Now, the reason why I liaised with the experts on the mainland is because the chief executive is appointed by the central government. So if we elect a chief executive on the basis of our understanding, and if that understanding is not in line with the understanding on the mainland, then there would be a problem with the appointment. And needless to say, I have also carefully considered the views of local legal professionals on this issue. In the course of discussions, I have explained to the legal experts how the Hong Kong SALG, applying the rules of statutory interpretation embodied in prevailing Hong Kong case law, had come to the view that the term of a CE returned in an election should always be 5 years. Now, I have summarized the legal opinions of the mainland, which are rather uniform. They all point out that the legislative intent of the relevant provisions of the Basic Law is that the term of a CE returned in a by-election should be the remaining term of the outgoing CE. The Basic Law, being a national law, was adopted by the National People's Congress in the context of the institutional framework and rules of statutory interpretation of the mainland. Now, if I may explain to you the jurisprudential consideration as I looked into this issue. The terms of important officers in state organs such as the President, Vice President, NPC, State Council, and the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference are invariably 5 years. Where an office falls vacant prematurely, the successor will serve the remaining term of the outgoing office holder. In the opinion of mainland experts, the NPC adopted the Basic Law with the same understanding of Article 46, which governs the term of office of the CE. No further provision to elaborate on this point was considered necessary. We have also revisited in depth the original intent underlying the design laid down in the Basic Law in respect of the CE election system. Before we achieve the ultimate goal of electing the CE by universal suffrage, the CE is elected by a broadly representative election committee. The election committee is not meant to be an ad hoc establishment formed for a particular election. It is not to be disbanded after an election. It is rather a standing body with a term of 5 years. Its term was, according to the original design, to be the same as that of the CE, so that it might handle any by-election that might have to be conducted. In practice, there has been some time lag between the terms of an election committee and the CE respectively. Nevertheless, the legislative intent of the original design should still hold. Members of the election committee come from different sectors. They assume office with a set of preconceived beliefs as regards the criteria for selecting the CE and are accountable to their respective sectors. If the term of a CE returned in a by-election were to run afresh for another 5 years, it would be possible for an election committee to exert its influence far beyond the time that was originally intended. This would leave little room for the members of the succeeding election committee to realize the will of their respective sectors. In other words, let's say in the 4th year, they elect a chief executive for a term of 5 years. That means for the next term, election committee, it can only exercise its choice for a period of 1 year. So it was not the original intent. On the contrary, the arrangements for the election committee suggest that the original intent of Article 53 of the Basic Law was that the term of a CE returned in a by-election will not run afresh. A CE who vacates its office prematurely and a CE returned in the by-election can be regarded as consecutive office holders of the same term of office. Such an interpretation is not inconsistent with Article 46 of the Basic Law, which provides that the term of office of the Chief Executive of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region shall be 5 years and applies to the normal situation but not the term of a substitute Chief Executive filling up a vacancy. Furthermore, there is no direct link between Article 53(2) and Article 46. Because here there's mention of Article 45, which refers to Annex 1, and Annex 1 talks about the design of the election committee. As shown in the records of the Basic Law Drafting Committee, the draft of the second paragraph of Article 53, examined by the 6th plenary session of the Drafting Committee held on the 12th of December 1987, stipulated that in the event that the office of the Chief Executive became vacant, a new Chief Executive should be elected within 6 months. In the course of deliberation, it was suggested that there should be legal provisions on whether a CE returned under that article should be regarded as a CE for a separate term. This suggestion was accepted. Accordingly, in the draft basic law of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region of the People's Republic of China for solicitation of opinions, adopted by the 7th plenary session of the drafting committee held on the 28th of April 1988, the wording was the chief executive of the new term. Subsequently, in the 8th plenary session of the drafting committee held on the 14th of January 1989, the characters Yet Gai term were deleted. That is, the reference to the chief executive of the new term was replaced by the reference to the new chief executive. It can thus be seen that the drafting committee had a clear understanding that the chief executive of the new term and the new chief executive carried different legal effects. It was on this understanding that the chief executive of the new term was not used. Evidently, it was the intent that a CE returned in a by-election was not to be a CE for a new term. This view is fortified if we take into account the decision of the NPCSC on the 26th of April 2004 on interpreting the provisions of the Basic Law in the election of the CE in 2007 and the formation of the Legislative Council in 2008. The first paragraph of this begins with the election of the Chief Executive of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region for the third term to be held in the year 2007. That was the quote. The NPCSC is of the firm view that the election of the CE to be held in 2007 is the election of the CE for the third term. And the election of the CE held before that will only be in the nature of a by-election, fulfilling the office left vacant by the CE for the second term, and will not be the election of the CE for the third term. This, no doubt, lends support to the NPCSC's understanding of the term of the CE. After thorough study and deliberation, the Hong Kong SARG has adjusted its understanding of the provisions of the Basic Law on the term of the CE. We agree that the term of a CE returned in a by-election is not 5 years, but is the remainder of the term of the outgoing CE. The Hong Kong SARG will consider introducing a bill into the Legislative Council as soon as practicable to amend the Chief Executive Election Ordinance. The proposed amendments will add provisions to deal with the case of the CE's office falling vacant before the term expires. The bill will specifically provide for the term of office of a CE returned in a by-election so as to reflect more accurately the legislative intent of the Basic Law. If the bill is passed by the Legislative Council, it will be reported to the NPCSC for the record. This will provide a solid legal basis for the term of office of a CE to be returned in a by-election. Now, if I explain to you that we are talking about two different sets of systems of law with the different historical background. The one country, two system principle is an innovation with no precedent. Compared with constitutions elsewhere which have come through a long history of development, the Basic Law is still in its early days as a constitutional instrument of the Hong Kong SAR. There are bound to be a lot of jurisprudential issues awaiting exploration. The Basic Law is the interface between two systems under one country. It is unavoidable that the mainland organs and legal sectors in the local institutions and legal sectors will sometimes have different interpretations of the provisions of the Basic Law. Given the common goal of preserving the stability and prosperity of Hong Kong, there should not be any difference that cannot be resolved through mutual understanding, empathetic communication, accommodation, and frank communication. Thank you.
The Secretary for Justice has elucidated her position regarding the tenure of office of the new chief executive. Perhaps Eslie can let you know about the procedures. The CPG today approved the resignation of the ex-chief executive Mr. Tung, effective today under the CE election ordinance. If the post falls vacant on the 120th day, an election will have to take place. If the day doesn't fall on a Sunday, then the Sunday that follows immediately afterwards will be the polling day. And the 120th day would be July 10th. It is a Sunday, and the election will take place on that particular day. The arrangement for the chief executive will be arranged in 3 stages from now to mid-April would be the first stage. During this period, the REO will be compiling and publish the electoral roll and in preparation for the next stage of work. The second stage would run from mid-April to May. During this period, the REO will arrange for by-election of the election committee. The third stage would be falling on June or July. During this period, all the arrangements for the chief executive election would be arranged. The REO would be looking into the electoral roll and identify whether there is anybody in the election committee who has passed away and has to have their names deleted. And under the law, 14 days after the chief executive office has fallen vacant, and a temporary provisional electoral roll will have to be published as the basis for by-election. According to the information, there are 33 seats of the election committee that are vacant, and they belong to 17 different subsectors. In the coming few days, the REO will be ascertaining the data. After the publication of the provisional electoral roll and completion of all the procedures, the REO would embark on the second stage. Between mid-April and May, the REO will be arranging for the by-election of the subsectors of the election committee to fill the vacancies there. And considering the legislative procedures, the election day would take place sometime in early May. For the nomination of the candidates for the subsector, the nomination period would be 7 days, and canvassing period would be 12 days. Once the electoral roll for the 800-member election committee, then it would proceed to the third stage, and the election would then take place for the chief executive. Under the law, the nomination period for the chief executive would be no less than 14 days. Canvassing period would be no more than 20 days. And these two periods would fall in June and July. The election committee and the REO would get on with the preparation work. The provisional electoral roll would be published, and the ballot papers and the polling stations would be arranged, and details would be announced as soon as they become available. As usual, the REO or the election committee would be working together with government departments to arrange for the election to take place in accordance with the statutory timetable to make sure that the election is held in an open, fair, and honest manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lam. This is now the floor is now open to questions. To allow more members of the media to ask questions, please limit your question to one at a time. If there is still time, then we can have a second round of questions. And please, as usual, before you ask your question, please give us the name of yourself and the agency you represent.
Off row, I think, yes.
Yeah, Mr. Chang, are you a candidate for the next chief executive position?
Can you identify your
I'm Joshua Feldman from Bloomberg News.
Well, I received the news about the resignation of Mr. Tong from him at the end of last month. Since then, I've been working very hard with my colleagues on preparing for all the work that needs to be done to carry out the election of the new chief executive. This is my priorities. Any other thing, including possibility of a candidature on my part, is certainly not my priority. It's something which I'm not going to look at the moment.
Okay. 對唔住，呢位女士啦。
The lady there, Mr. TSANG, just now there's mention. Can you please identify? Can you speak up, please? And also, can you please identify yourself? I'm from cable TV, LEUNG. Mr. TSANG, just now there's mention that all principal officials will stay on, but before that, did anyone ever indicate their wish to leave? And also, could you answer the previous question in Chinese? That is, will you run for election? Well, but there we had simultaneous interpretation service. But to answer your question, for all non-official members of the Executive Council and for all principal officials, they will stay in their post and continue their work until we have elected the new chief executive. One question at a time, please. The gentleman there, and then TVB. I'm from Mingpao, Chao Chin-hong. Just now, you said for the C election, would you consider running in the election for the new chief executive? One question at a time, please, as I said. Now, please do understand, this only happened at the end of last month. And in the past 2 or 3 weeks, I had to carry on with my usual duties as the Chief Secretary for Administration. At the same time, I had to make preparation for this follow-up task. My primary task now is to ensure there is a fair and open election of the Chief Executive. And during this period, I hope together with my colleagues we'll be able to maintain the stability of Hong Kong so that while our economy has taken an upturn, it will not be held back in any way. And that's the work I have to attend to now. I have no other priorities at the moment. Mr. TSANG, I'm from TVB. Now, Mr. TSANG, you used to call Mr. Tong your boss, but you are now the boss, so congratulations. But people have been saying that it's not an easy boss to become because several of your subordinates might be interested to become the chief executive too. So how would you define them? Now, I am the acting chief executive. I have the support of all my colleagues, and everyone will continue with their work in their own post. And I am confident that we will be able to maintain the momentum of our development and maintain social stability. At the same time, we will be able to run a successful election of the chief executive so that we will eventually have a new chief executive.
Yes, very good. Stood up, and I think 呢位綠色褸嘅男士啊。
And then the gentleman in green.
Jan Handelszeitung Secretary. Hong Kong understands itself as the bridge between China and the outside world. Now the relationship, the cross-border relationship between China and Taiwan is getting a little bit more dicey. Do you see any possibility that Hong Kong might play a role in fostering kind of constructive dialogue between Beijing and Taipei?
Well, we are part of the Chinese nation. We are practicing one country, two systems. And we have proved over the last 7.5 years that the one country, two systems principle have been successfully implemented in Hong Kong. We have gone through elections of the legislature. We have gone through elections of a chief executive as well. At the moment, we are dealing with an election of a chief executive when a chief executive resigns in the middle of the term. In other words, we believe that we have demonstrated a capitalistic system in Hong Kong is operating very successfully within the framework of a Chinese nation. And I do believe it is something which is reassuring to Taiwanese people that the system which has been laid out can work. And whatever we are able to do to help the nations to reunite at some stage, Hong Kong will spare no effort.
Okay, 呢位。
曾生，蘋果日報幕店員，我有啲想問你就係咧，即係自從
Mr. TSANG, since you became aware that outside knew that you might become the chief executive, a lot of criticisms came up. Bishop Zen even said some of your policies were shameful. And a number of EXCO members didn't actually come to the meeting, and Mr. LEUNG even said he wasn't aware of today's EXCO meeting. So do you think your team actually supports you? Now, if I could state the fact correctly, all EXCO members have agreed and have accepted my invitation to stay on in their jobs. And I'm not just talking about the principal officials. All other EXCO members have agreed to continue their service, and that is the current arrangement, and we are very clear about that now. And I will also try to do my best as the acting chief executive. Of course, many of our policies may not have the support of everyone, and we respect individual criticisms. But what is most important is that when we formulate policy, we follow an open process. Everyone could see what we're doing. And when we formulate policy, we go through consultation and legislative process. We make sure all the steps are followed. We've been doing that all along. We will continue to do that. But of course, not all policies are popular with everyone. And so for some policies in particular, there might be individuals who don't welcome it, and we have to accept that fact, and we must accept criticisms, and we must be modest when we listen to criticisms, and that's my attitude, and I will continue to be modest in listening to criticisms, including those of the bishop. Okay, the gentleman there.
In the last few days, a lot of people say that they expect you to be a tougher leader than your predecessor. In what ways do you think your style of governance will differ from him?
You must realize I'm only an acting chief executive. My additional responsibility as an acting chief executive, in addition to my being a chief secretary, is to conduct this election of the chief executive as quickly, as efficiently, as openly as possible. I don't think there's a question of toughness involved in this. What is important is to do it fairly, openly, in a strict accordance with our law. This I'm going to do with the help of all my colleagues here.
Okay, 呢位。
唔該，鄭生，大公報陳小瑜，我想問咧。
I'm from Taikong Power, Chen Xiuyu. After being the acting chief executive, would you still handle the West Kowloon Cultural District? If not, who is going to handle it? I am still CS. I would continue to do the job that was done by the CS, including the West Kowloon Cultural District. Right, this lady here, and in the last but one row. Mr. James Tin said that you're marvelous, you're wonderful, and he doesn't have to support the government that much since you become the chief executive. In this particular period, do you think that yours is a caretaker government only? Well, we must bear in mind that since the resignation of Mr. Tong, the first priority for us is to maintain stability of Hong Kong, and also under the basic law and also under the CE election ordinance, we have to get on with election for the chief executive to elect the next chief executive. As I said in my speech, not only do I have to work hard with my colleagues, I also need the support of the general public as well as the Legislative Council. I'm sure that I would get the support of the LegCo, in particular Mr. James Tin. The lady over there. SCMP, Claudia, I'm here. If I may put this to Mr. Zhang, you said that you grew up drinking Hong Kong water and you wouldn't do anything that would be detrimental to Hong Kong. You are a devout Catholic yourself. If one of these days you have to do something that would go against your conscience, say, for instance, you failed to reflect to the central government about the Hong Kong people's aspirations for universal suffrage, would you resign to take responsibility, or what? What commitment is there? I've been in public service for 30 years. What I do, what I say, members of the public are very clear. I am working on the basis of serving the members of the public, both in my capacity as CS and also acting CE. It is with this attitude that I hope that I would gain the support of the people of Hong Kong. I will continue to work along this line. The lady in the last but one row, and
yeah, in the black jacket. Yeah.
Mr. Tsang, Tiny Lin from Reuters. You've talked repeatedly about the need to have stability in Hong Kong, but the silence that you've kept and the silence that your government has kept, over this whole issue since last week has done a lot of damage. Can you explain your action, please?
Let's face the fact. Mr. Tong decided to submit his resignation on Thursday. He immediately accounted for his decision to public on Thursday. There was no question of silence of any kind. Secondly, the Central People's Government decided to accept the resignation of Mr. Tong at 6 o'clock today. We are now accounting for this, particularly the follow-up action as a special administrative region, as regards the election of a new chief executive, as regards transitional arrangement at 8:30 today. I think we are trying our very best to ensure the world at large and our people in Hong Kong are well informed of what the government is doing.
Okay, the gentleman over there.
Sir, remember the Spanish news agency. As new acting chief executive of Hong Kong, do you plan to meet in the forthcoming days or weeks with the Chinese leaders to discuss your temporary policies? Do you plan to meet with any of the Chinese central government leaders in Beijing to discuss your policies?
Well, there are policies well within the autonomy of Hong Kong. This will be carried out in a usual way in Hong Kong. There are matters which touch on both Hong Kong as our government and the central government, for instance, on constitutional development. This is a matter which we regularly, but not necessarily frequently, discuss with the central government. This will continue to do.
Okay, Carrie, in house.
Carrie. Hong Kong Standard Chen Kali. Mr. Tsang, you said that last month you became aware of Mr. Tong's departure. Can you elaborate further on this? Did you talk to the mainland government? How did you become aware of Mr. Tong's departure? Did you talk to the mainland government? Mr. Tong decided to resign for health reason. Last month, I learned about this from Mr. Tong himself. Mr. Zhang from Sing Pao, there are some reports that said that prior to Mr. Tong's departure, you did secretly make some trip to Beijing to talk to the mainland officials. Through different channels, did you know that China would like you to become the next chief executive? I think I have to make it clear that because of the constitutional development, I would make trips to Beijing to talk to people of Hong Kong Macau Affairs Office. In February, I did make a trip to Beijing for one day, and I did account myself to you for that. I did similar things before. I say this again, that in relation to Mr. Tong's resignation, Mr. Tong decided to resign on health ground. I learned about this from Mr. Tong himself. The gentleman over there, and Joseph. Mr. Tsang from Oriental Daily. During the Lunar New Year, you said you were going to retire. Do you still have this plan? We have a new development, and what I have to do is to get on with the CE election so that the people of Hong Kong will get a new chief executive soon enough. And I also have to carry on my duty as CS. I have to make sure that there would be stability in the community, and that's my number one priority. I don't have time for other issues.
Mr. Tsang, 6 months later, would you be resigning to run for the election? Let's say if there is anyone in your team who is also resigning to run for election, would there be vacuum? One question, please. You want Ms. Eslie to answer your other question as well? Are you concerned that the term of 2 years, might be challenged in court by someone? Are you putting the question to me first, or are you putting your other question to Mr. Zhang first? Can you please repeat your question? Now, after acting for 6 months or earlier than that 6 months, would you resign to run for election? What if there are other officials who also resign to run for election? Would there be a vacuum in your team? Now, as I've said, for myself, at the moment, my primary task is to make sure the election go well and also to perform my tasks properly as the Chief Secretary for Administration. Now, if anyone wishes to run for the election, there are already rules clearly spelled out in the law. Anyone who wishes to run for election must resign. Now, any principal official or any other officials in the government, if they want to run for election, they must resign. But when they resign, there will be someone to act in their place. Because we have a sound institutional framework, we have sound organization in the government. So if a post becomes vacant, definitely there will be someone else to fill it. So it will not affect public service. It will not affect social stability. The gentleman there at the back. Oh, the question for Ms. Eslie Leung, yes. Is it fair to do that? Well, perhaps we should leave it till the second round then. The gentleman there.
Yeah.
I'm from the Phoenix TV. Now, just now you mentioned that in the next 120 days, the primary task of the government is to prepare for the next election. But Hong Kong's economy is only just rebounded, and there are still a lot of controversies in the community. So is it possible that your work would then become lopsided? Would you have any policies, concrete policies to do with these various issues? Now, after 120 days, we have to conduct an election. And that is the law of Hong Kong, the current law of Hong Kong. Hong Kong people know that very well. So I don't believe that just because we have to conduct an election, we have to prepare for the election for other business of the government, it will be affected in any way. And also for all our principal officials, they are in post, they will not be resigning. So I believe under the circumstance, our public service will continue and social stability will prevail.
Can you speak a bit louder, please?
Sure. Alexandra Harney with the Financial Times. My question is that some people have expressed concern that the 2-year term violates the basic law's promise of a high degree of autonomy and the concept of one country, two systems. Could you give us a response to those critics?
Well, perhaps the Secretary of Justice will answer you this, but let me say one thing. We have come to the conclusion that the term of a chief executive elected in these circumstances should be the remainder of Mr. Tong's term. This is in accordance with our own research, in accordance with our own deliberations, having taken into account the evidence we have collected and the views expressed to us in the mainland and in Hong Kong. And we will do it accordingly. And this is a total respect of our own legal system and our law. And this is what we are going to do it accordingly. I'm sure there are people who will support the idea of a 5-year term, and some will insist on 2 years terms. And I'm sure they will listen to what the Secretary of Justice has already said and will continue to explain and come probably in the same conclusion. And we are going to explain as much as we can over the next few weeks. And if there is any challenge at all, we will meet that challenge. And at the same time, we will ensure the election that we're going to hold will not be disrupted.
So I think the acting chief executive has already answered your question.
Okay. 呢位女士
The lady, and then whoever hasn't asked the question yet, the lady first. I'm from RTHK. Mr. Zhang, could you speak up, please, and which agency do you represent? I'm from RTHK. Sorry, I couldn't hear you at all. Is there something wrong with the amplifier? Chong Lai Yi from RTHK, can you hear me? Now, just now you said at the end of last month you knew Mr. Tong was resigning. And then last week, when Mr. Tong came back from Beijing, you met with him at the government office. And then, you know, we saw from the camera lens that you were whistling as you walked into the office. So could you share with us that your feeling at that moment? Were you happy or were you excited or what? Now, I must be very honest with you. Every day, there are moments when I am relaxed. And every day there are moments when I feel concerned, when I'm sad or I'm sentimental. Well, there are some moments you might catch me smiling, at other moments you might catch me in a more somber mood. I think it's the same with everyone. It's not possible for me to have the same expression all day long, right? But one thing is for sure. About Mr. Tong's departure, I've said that many times. Just now I have said it in more detail. And then when Mr. Tong made his announcement on Thursday, I also told you my feelings. Please, can I have your cooperation? You're blocking someone. That lady there, and then there, on the second row, there's a gentleman who hasn't asked a question. Mr. Chow, Mr. Tsang, now in many opinion polls, can you identify yourself, please? I'm from Commercial Daily, Hong Kong Daily. Now, in many opinion polls, you have high ratings, and you say the community is relatively stable now. So, to ensure more stability, should you not make clear whether you are going to run for the election? Well, I want to make clear now. I want to do my task well now. I want to make sure that the election will be run properly. Also, we will maintain the momentum of our economic recovery. And as for other issues, I will only think about that at a later stage. And I'm sure when I come to any decision, I most definitely will tell the public about it. I'm from ATV, Mr. Zhang. Now, you are acting now as a chief executive. You will be using Mr. Tong's old team. So do you think you will face a lot of challenge in your work? Now, I've known my colleagues for some time now. And just like me, they all feel saddened that Mr. Tong is leaving. But then they also, like me, we all here because we want to serve the public. And so with this in mind, we have a common goal. And so we'll be working very well together to make sure that the next chief executive election will be run properly and smoothly. And then our economy will continue to recover and develop. Now, I'm very confident about this, and as I said earlier to you, for every principal official, he or she will stay in his post to continue to serve the public. Now, we are running out of time. Last two questions, please. Francis and the gentleman there. Francis.
RTHK. Question for Ms. Leung. Ms. Leung, it would appear that we have just had an interpretation of the basic law without the procedural nicety of going through the NPC Standing Committee in order to get that interpretation. It appears that Hong Kong has done it for the central government. Some people will look at this and surely say that in their view, the common law system in Hong Kong has just had a body blow, that it can no longer, the basic law can no longer be safely interpreted using common law principles, and they will point to it the fact that two successive secretaries for constitutional affairs have given assurances on terms to the Legislative Council that have been proven wrong. What would you say to those people who feel that this is a body blow?
First of all, the conclusion which I've arrived at, that the term of the new chief executive under Article 53 of the Basic Law is based on common law principles and not on any interpretation, as you put it, by the NPCSC. There has been no interpretation by the Standing Committee of the NPC, of the National People's Congress.
I think we agree on that, Ms. Leung. My question was, it appears that interpretation has been reached without going through the NPC Standing Committee, and that mainland principles are now applying an interpretation, not the common law. Is that the case now?
No, that is not the case. But in considering our position under Article 53 of the Basic Law, we take into consideration the arguments put forward by the legal experts in the mainland, from which we elicited the history of the legislation to find out exactly what the legislative intent was. Now, that principle is also adopted by in the common law. you have to look at the legislative intent to ascertain what exactly the term of the new chief executive should be. The fact that the government took a different stand doesn't mean that we are adopting whatever the legal expert in the mainland says. As I explained to everybody present here today, I explained how we analyzed the history of the promulgation of the Basic Law, and also what the legislative intent was when the Basic Law was drafted.
Two secretaries of Constitutional Affairs get it wrong.
I think just one question.
Please do not be too conspiratorial. I think Ms. Leung have explained to us fully how she have taken into several things, all the factors into account, and applying our own traditional legal principle came to her own conclusion, and explained to what her conclusion is. This is entirely our own tradition. It has nothing to do with any interpretation of the Basic Law by the NPC.
Okay, 各位男士。
Apple Daily. Mr. Zhang, you are responsible for the constitutional development. You're likely to take part in the election. Would there be any conflicts there? One question, please. Well, it was, as I explained a moment ago, Mr. Tong decided to resign on health reason. We fully appreciate his sentiment. As I said many times before, we respect Mr. Tong's decision. We cannot change Mr. Tong's decision, though. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you.